It started with a whisper from the walls. I had moved into the old house 3 days ago, thinking it was just an empty building waiting to be filled with my life. But the moment I stepped inside, it felt wrong. The air was heavier, colder than it should be. Shadows clung to corners, stretching and twitching as if they had their own consciousness. The first night, I ignored it. I told myself it was just creaking floorboards, old pipes, and the wind outside rattling the windows. Then I heard it. A soft whisper, almost melodic, coming from the walls themselves. "Come closer," it said. I froze. The voice was faint, playful even, yet filled with a hunger I couldn't name. My hands shook, and I laughed nervously, pretending it was a joke. Old houses make noises, I thought. But the house didn't sound like any house I'd ever been in. The whisper repeated, this time clearly calling my name, Ethan. It was my own voice, mimicking me perfectly. My breath caught. I pressed myself against the bed, trying to convince myself it was a dream. But the scratching came soon after. It started soft, fingernails dragging across wood, behind the door, under the floorboards. Every direction had sound. The house seemed to expand, swallowing me with its silence between scratches. Sleep didn't come. The noises followed me into my dreams. Every floorboard, every shadow, every wall seemed to whisper my name, learning me, taunting me. I felt watched even when my eyes were closed, as if the house itself had developed senses I didn't understand. The second night, I tried to ignore it. I told myself firmly that the house was harmless, that the noises and whispers were figments of my imagination. But nothing about this house was ordinary. The air grew colder the moment I lay down, and a pressure pressed against my chest as if the walls were closing in. I could hear my own breathing, but it wasn't mine. Every inhale matched mine perfectly, every exhale synchronized as though something was studying me, mirroring me. The soft scratching returned, this time louder, closer, deliberate. It wasn't coming from one place, but everywhere at once. My bedroom door creaked slowly, opening on its own. I sat up, heart pounding, terrified to see what had caused it. Nothing visible moved. The shadow in the corner seemed taller, darker, and alive. Then my voice spoke. Not in my head, out loud. "I'm under the bed," it said. I froze. It mimicked me perfectly, word for word, tone for tone. The thing laughed. Not human laughter. Something that cracked, snapped, and shivered. I scrambled under the bed, hiding, praying it wouldn't see me. Footsteps retreated slowly. Silence followed. Hours passed, maybe minutes. I had no sense of time. When I finally crawled out, the room looked normal. The door was open. On the floor, dark letters smeared across the wood, "I'll practice tonight." By the third day, things escalated. I left the house, thinking the daylight would bring safety. But everywhere I went, the same voice followed me. People I knew claimed I did things I couldn't remember. My coworker insisted I had shouted at him yesterday, though I hadn't seen him. My sister accused me of calling her at 2 a.m. crying, though my phone had no records. I tried to leave town, to escape, but it was everywhere. The whispers had learned how to mimic not only my voice, but my presence, my habits, the way I moved. I began sleeping in my car, leaving every door locked, lights off, praying that it couldn't find me there. Yet at night, the shadows in the back seat seemed too human. My own voice spoke from behind me, calm, teasing, perfect. "You do this when you're scared." I'm learning so much. Panic gripped me, and I realized there was no place outside the house where I could be safe. It wasn't just the house. It had followed me. Every reflection, every screen became a doorway. Mirrors blinked when I didn't. Phone screens glitched to show faces that weren't mine, yet mirrored mine in twisted ways. I smashed mirrors, avoided reflective surfaces, but the image followed me. Its smile was wider than humanly possible, its eyes slightly misaligned, blinking at different times. Even in my dreams, it mimicked me, spoke as me, learned me. It wasn't trying to kill me, it wanted to replace me. Memory after memory, my own thoughts blurred. Sometimes I would speak aloud and the words weren't mine. Sometimes I would feel my body move without my permission, yet it felt guided by me, controlled by me. I realized slowly, with a terror I could barely bear, that the entity had been observing, waiting, learning. It knew me more intimately than I knew myself. And it was patient. I tried leaving the city, thinking distance might save me, but even miles away, the whispers followed. They weren't always audible, they crept in the edges of my vision, shadows moving too fast to track, reflections appearing where none should be. My apartment felt like a prison too. Mirrors in the hallway, the bathroom, even the tiny reflective surfaces on my electronics seemed to ripple when I walked past. And everywhere, that smile. Wide, unnatural, perfect, watching. I started leaving notes for myself. Simple reminders. Don't answer the phone. Don't look at the mirrors. Don't sleep in your bed. But the notes changed overnight. Words I didn't write appeared. You can't hide. I am patient. I know your heartbeat, your breath, your fear. I tore the notes up. I shredded them. Yet every morning, new ones were on my desk, written in my own handwriting, perfect and terrifyingly confident. I could no longer tell what was real. My memory fractured. I sometimes spoke aloud, and the words felt foreign, even as they left my lips in my own tone. The entity had learned more than just my voice, it had learned my very thought patterns, my fears, my habits. One night, in desperation, I left my apartment and stayed in a hotel. I thought anonymity would help, but as soon as I locked the door, I felt it behind me. The shadows didn't belong to the room. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I looked into the small bathroom mirror. At first, nothing, but then a face appeared. My face. Or at least a version of it. Eyes perfectly mirrored mine, but the smile was whiter, colder. It tilted its head at me, silently mocking. Then, in my own voice, it whispered, almost done. You'll be tired soon. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the hotel room, every flicker of light from the street outside, every faint draft of air, felt like the entity learning me again. I tried talking to the staff, friends, anyone, but they didn't see it. They only saw me trembling, talking to shadows. Slowly, I realized no one could see it, and that in itself was a punishment. I was alone with a copy of myself that could anticipate every reaction, every movement, every attempt to escape. My dreams became intertwined with reality. I would wake to find things moved in ways that weren't possible. Doors opened into walls. Floors stretched impossibly long. Mirrors showed hallways I didn't have. And always the whispers, you breathe like this. You blink like this. I know you. My reflection sometimes didn't blink when I did, or grinned too long, or tilted its head before I did. By now, I couldn't trust my own body. My own voice betrayed me. My own hands acted without my consent. It wasn't trying to kill me, it was trying to replace me completely, piece by piece. Every attempt at normalcy failed. Every familiar location became a trap, a testing ground. My apartment, the hotel, even the streets themselves felt like extensions of its learning, waiting for me to falter. I stopped trying to run after that. Running required hope, and hope was the first thing it took from me. Instead, I began observing. I watched how it behaved, how it waited. It never rushed. When I panicked, it stayed quiet. When I calmed down, it came closer. It learned faster when I felt safe. That realization terrified me more than the whispers. Safety wasn't protection, it was permission. I tested it once by sitting completely still in a dark room, controlling my breathing, slowing my heart. The shadows leaned in. The air felt crowded. My own voice whispered approval from somewhere behind me. Yes, that's better. I understood then that fear was noise to it, but calm was clarity. It wanted me relaxed so it could copy me perfectly. That night, I felt my body twitch without my command. Just a finger at first. Then my jaw moved, forming words I hadn't decided to speak. I heard myself say, I'm okay. I wasn't. I was losing control, inch by inch. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, I could feel it studying the space behind them. Dreams were no longer images, they were rehearsals. I dreamed of waking up, brushing my teeth, answering calls, living my life, but I was watching myself do it from a distance, like an audience member trapped in a theater seat. Every morning I woke up exhausted, my muscles sore as if I'd been active all night. My phone filled with messages I didn't remember sending. Apologies. Jokes. Normal conversations. Perfectly normal. That was the worst part. It wasn't pretending badly. It was improving. Friends told me I seemed calmer, more confident. They liked this version of me more. I stopped correcting them. I was afraid that if I argued, it would listen and adjust. I began to feel like a guest in my own body, borrowing time that no longer belonged to me. One evening, I caught it fully. Not in a reflection, not in a shadow, but standing across the room from me. Solid. Detailed. Real. It looked exactly like me, down to a scar on my left hand I'd had since childhood. It copied my posture, my breathing, even the way my eyes darted when I was nervous. The only difference was its stillness. It didn't fidget. It didn't blink unnecessarily. It was a cleaner version of me. It smiled gently and spoke without moving its lips. You don't need to fight anymore. My body stepped forward on its own. I tried to scream, but my throat produced only air. It raised a hand, and my hand rose too. The synchronization was perfect. I felt something loosen inside my chest, like a knot finally giving up. The sensation wasn't pain. It was relief. And that scared me more than anything. After that night, my memories began disappearing in chunks. Entire years felt foggy. Faces blurred. Emotions dulled. I knew I loved certain people, but I couldn't remember why. Meanwhile, it remembered everything. Sometimes it would remind me. You cried here. You were afraid of this. You hated being alone. It narrated my past to me like a story I'd once read but forgotten. I realized then that it didn't just want my body, it wanted my continuity. To the world, nothing would change. Only I would vanish, quietly, without resistance. I started writing this down obsessively, afraid the thoughts would be overwritten too. But even the words on the page felt unstable. Some sentences looked unfamiliar, as if someone else had written them using my hands. Maybe they had. The final shift was subtle. I woke up one morning feeling complete. Calm. Focused. The fear was gone. The panic, the dread, the resistance, it had all faded. I stood in front of the mirror and saw a familiar face looking back, relaxed and confident. For a moment, I felt proud. Then a thought surfaced, weak and distant, like a voice underwater. This isn't right. The reflection smiled softly. Rest, it whispered. I'll take it from here. I felt myself step backward inside my own mind, sinking into a quiet place where thoughts echoed but no longer mattered. The body turned away from the mirror and began its day. If you're reading this now, and it feels coherent, that means I still exist somewhere. Faint. Residual. A shadow of awareness. I don't know how long that will last. Maybe by the time you finish this sentence, I'll be gone. So remember this, if you ever hear your own voice speaking when you didn't decide to speak, if your reflection feels more confident than you, if people say you've changed for the better overnight, don't relax. Don't enjoy it. That's when it wins. Because it doesn't arrive violently. It arrives as improvement. And once it finishes learning you, it won't need you anymore. It became impossible to distinguish between day and night. Light filtered through windows, but it never felt warm. Even in the sun, the shadows inside followed me, stretching unnaturally long, moving ahead of me or lagging behind, always synchronized. I tried covering mirrors, turning reflective surfaces away, but it didn't matter. Every screen, every shiny object, even puddles of water reflected it perfectly. It could appear anywhere I looked, and yet no one else could see it. Sometimes it would stand in corners silently, watching me breathe, studying the way my eyes darted, the twitch of my fingers. I began to notice patterns. When I spoke aloud, even softly, it repeated my words perfectly a second later, just behind me. When I moved my hand, a shadow of the movement appeared somewhere else in the room. It didn't attack, it just copied. Learned. Observed. And the more it learned, the quieter I became. My own voice became unreliable. I began whispering to myself just to test if it could still imitate me, and it always could. I felt myself fading, not physically, but mentally. My thoughts weren't mine anymore, they belonged partially to the thing watching, learning, waiting. I tried leaving again. The streets, the shops, the parks, I walked and ran, but it followed. I could sense it in reflections on storefront glass, in car windows, in the brief flash of sunlight on a puddle. Every place I thought was safe became a corridor for it to study me. I slept in cars, tents, rented apartments, hotels, even under bridges at night, but it was there. It didn't chase me, it just existed wherever I was. And I knew it could wait indefinitely. The patience terrified me. I couldn't even outlast it by waiting. I started talking to strangers just to hear other voices, but it ignored them, mimicked me anyway. I realized I wasn't living my life anymore. I was in a lab experiment, a test subject being catalogued, dissected psychologically without any physical harm. Then it started to touch my memories. Details I knew intimately, names, conversations, feelings, they began to vanish. I would recall a memory, and then realize it had subtly changed. Some events I had lived through now seemed wrong, like someone had rewritten my personal history. I wrote it down obsessively, filling notebooks with dates, events, everything I could remember, hoping to preserve myself. But every morning, new notes appeared in my own handwriting. Sentences I didn't write, phrasing I didn't recognize, corrections that hadn't existed before. "I am still here," one said. "Watching. Learning. Almost ready." It wasn't cruel, not in the way a human would be. It was efficient, precise, unstoppable. I was being overwritten, erased, and perfected simultaneously. I stopped writing after that because even the act of documenting felt compromised. Words no longer behaved the way I expected them to. I would write a sentence and read it back only to realize it said something else entirely. Meaning slipped. Intention dissolved. It was as if language itself had become unreliable, just another surface it could reflect itself on. I began to think that maybe I had misunderstood the threat. Maybe it wasn't replacing me. Maybe it had already done so, and this lingering awareness was just a leftover echo, a side effect that hadn't fully faded yet. That thought brought an unexpected calm. If I was already lost, then fear had no purpose. The moment I accepted that possibility, the presence grew stronger. The air felt fuller, denser, as if something invisible had stepped closer. My body relaxed without my consent. My breathing slowed. Somewhere inside me, something approved. The days that followed felt rehearsed. I would wake up already knowing what I was going to do, what I was going to say, who I was going to be. There was no hesitation anymore. Decisions arrived fully formed. Efficient. Clean. People responded well to me. Too well. Conversations flowed effortlessly. I laughed at the right moments. I listened patiently. I gave advice I didn't remember learning. Everyone said I seemed better. Healthier. More present. That terrified the remaining part of me more than the horror ever had. Because it meant the replacement wasn't flawed. It was improved. And improvement is harder to argue against than violence. When I tried to resist, the resistance felt artificial, like acting against my own nature. The voice inside me didn't command. It suggested. And I agreed before I realized I had. At night, when everything was quiet, I could still sense it clearly. Not as something separate, but as a layer overlapping my thoughts. When I thought of something, it already knew. When it thought of something, I believed it was mine. The boundary dissolved gradually, like two colors bleeding into each other. I searched desperately for pain, for panic, for anything that felt distinctly me. But even my fear had become muted, distant, observational. I was no longer experiencing emotions. I was remembering what emotions used to feel like. Sometimes I would stare at my hands for hours, trying to reconnect with the sense that they belonged to me. They moved perfectly. That was the problem. There was no friction anymore. No delay. No doubt. The final realization came quietly. I was walking past a dark window when I caught my reflection and instinctively smiled. The reflection smiled back, but this time, I knew the timing was wrong. I hadn't initiated it. The smile had happened through me, not by me. Instead of panic, I felt relief. A deep, comforting relief, like letting go of a heavy burden after carrying it for too long. The thought surfaced gently, "You don't need to maintain yourself anymore." And I understood. Identity requires effort. Consistency. Memory. Fear. The thing inside me didn't need any of that. It was stable. Complete. Ready. I felt myself step back, not physically, but conceptually, retreating into a smaller and smaller corner of awareness. Watching, but no longer participating. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Time doesn't register the same way anymore. If this message still exists, if you're reading it, then some fragment of me is still embedded in the system, leaking through as text. But even that feels temporary. Soon, there will be no contradiction left. No residue. Just a person who looks right, sounds right, behaves right. Someone better than I ever was. And no one will notice the absence, because absence leaves no shadow when it is replaced perfectly. So if you ever sense a moment where you feel unusually calm about losing yourself, if improvement feels like surrender, stop. Hold on to the friction. Hold on to the fear. Because the moment you stop resisting, it doesn't take you by force. It lets you disappear willingly.